Redditor 1. I've never told anyone this before, but there was a night in my childhood that still haunts my dreams. I was around 7 or 8 years old, and my little sister, no more than 5 or 6, had just drifted off to sleep beside me. I remember that night was unusually still, the air thick with a sense of something unspoken, even before the wind began to howl outside. It started when a strange sound nudged us awake, a soft, insistent tapping that pulled us from our cozy beds. I sat up in the dim glow of my nightlight, my heart fluttering like a trapped bird, and exchanged a confused look with my sister. We didn't speak. Words seemed too clumsy for the trembling silence that wrapped around us. Without a clear thought, we climbed out of our beds and crept towards the back door, drawn by a pull we couldn't quite explain. Stepping into the backyard, I was struck by how different the night felt. The wind whipped around us in a frenzy, scattering leaves and stirring the branches overhead as if nature itself was trying to warn us away. And yet, right there under the pale, uncertain light of the moon, there were children waiting. Their figures were slender and slight, moving with an eerie grace that made them seem more like apparitions than real kids. One of them caught my attention immediately. Unlike the others, who appeared as ordinary as any neighborhood children, albeit with an uncanny stillness, the one that stood out had a peculiar hue. His skin shimmered with a greenish-blue tint, a color that seemed impossible in the natural world. He wore a smile that was both inviting and unsettling, as if he knew secrets far beyond my understanding. We exchanged hesitant greetings, and soon enough the children beckoned us to join them by an old swing set that creaked under the relentless wind. I can still recall the sensation of the cold metal beneath my fingers as I gripped the chains of the swing. The wind howled louder, its chill seeping into my bones, yet the laughter of those strange children made everything feel almost normal. We played together as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, our voices mingling with the gusts that swept through the yard. Time seemed to stretch out in an endless loop, every second marked by the rhythmic squeak of the swing and the flutter of our quick, nervous breaths. But then, as if by some unspoken signal, everything changed. In the midst of our play, the children began to fade away. One moment they were there, and the next they were nothing more than silhouettes dissipating into the night. I stopped swinging and stared into the empty space where they had been, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. Beside me, my sister clutched my hand, her eyes wide with a terror I couldn't quite understand. I lifted my head, and that's when I saw it. A giant, unblinking eye hovering in the sky. It was as if the very heavens had opened up to reveal a single massive pupil, its gaze heavy and accusatory. The eye, rimmed with shadows and flecked with an otherworldly glow, seemed to bore into my soul, freezing me in place. Every instinct screamed to run, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away from that disturbing, celestial presence. For a long, heart-stopping moment, I felt as if the eye was dissecting every thought, every secret fear locked within me. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the eye vanished, swallowed up by the dark canvas of the night, leaving only an echo of its unnerving stare. My sister and I stood in stunned silence before slowly turning back towards the house. The walk was a blur of uneven steps and muffled sobs, as if our small legs couldn't carry us fast enough away from the inexplicable horror we had just witnessed. The next morning brought a strange kind of normalcy. I remember the early light filtering through the curtains and the scent of burnt toast from the kitchen. My mother returned home from her night shift at the grocery store, her face etched with worry. In the doorway she paused, taking in the sight of one of us entering the house. The confusion in her eyes was matched only by the silent questions that lingered in the air. There were no immediate answers, only a lingering dread that something was amiss, something that defied explanation. For years, that night remained an unsolved puzzle, a half-remembered nightmare that I often tried to dismiss as a figment of my childish imagination. But as I grew older and began working nights at a grocery store myself, I discovered that the past had a way of resurfacing, clawing its way into the present when you least expected it. It began with small, almost imperceptible signs. On my way home after a long shift, I would sometimes catch sight of a triangle-shaped craft, gliding silently above the city skyline. At first, I assumed it was a trick of the light, a passing airplane perhaps, its formation distorted by the haze of night. But as the nights grew longer and the sightings more frequent, the triangular UFOs became a persistent presence, a spectral reminder that what had happened in my childhood might not have been an isolated event. Then there was the light, a bright, unmoving light that appeared in the most incongruous places: a vacant lot, a deserted street corner, the empty field behind an abandoned building. It never flickered or dimmed. It simply hung there, a constant sentinel in the darkness. No matter how fast I walked or how many times I tried to rationalize it as a malfunctioning street lamp, the light remained unnervingly steady, as if it were watching, waiting. I began to document these occurrences, scribbling down notes in a tattered notebook during the quiet moments between customers and the occasional pause in the hum of the refrigerator units. Each entry was a desperate attempt to make sense of the inexplicable, a way to anchor my fear in words and dates. 11:15 p.m. Saw triangle UFO near the corner of Elm Street. Its lights were off and it hovered silently, like it was observing me. 12:05 a.m. A bright light appeared over the old park. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Yet even with my notes, the fear never truly left me. It had nestled deep within, a seed that grew into a constant gnawing dread. Sleep became a battleground. Night after night, I found myself tossing and turning, haunted by the memory of that giant eye and the spectral children with their greenish-blue skin. I would wake in a cold sweat, my heart drumming in my ears, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if the nightmares were more than just dreams. They seemed to seep into my waking hours, blurring the lines between memory and hallucination. I tried to convince myself that the UFOs and the unmoving light were nothing more than tricks of the tired mind, the kind of optical illusions that surface when you've spent too many hours in the fluorescent glow of a night shift. But every time I saw that unmistakable triangular shape in the sky, or that eerie light lingering in the distance, I was pulled back to that fateful night. The sound of the wind, the mysterious laughter of those strange children, and the oppressive gaze of the celestial eye. In moments of quiet desperation, I recalled my sister's hand in mine as we fled back into the house, her grip a fragile lifeline in a sea of unexplainable terror. I recalled the look of bewilderment on our mother's face as she tried to piece together our story, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and disbelief. And most of all, I remembered the profound loneliness of that night, the feeling that somehow we were caught in the midst of something vast and incomprehensible, a presence that stretched its influence across time and space. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time I catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye or a flash of light in the distance, I wonder if it's a remnant of that night or something new that has come to claim me. The memory of the giant eye in the sky is a constant reminder that some things are better left unexplained, some mysteries too dark to ever truly understand. I still walk home on nights when the air is thick with an unsettling stillness, and I glance upward, half expecting to see that all-seeing eye glaring down with unyielding intensity. And sometimes, in those moments, I feel that I'm not alone, that the strange children, the silent triangles, and that unwavering light are all pieces of a puzzle that I'm destined to never complete. Every night, as I lock the door behind me, I brace for the inevitable return of that unearthly presence. The past and the present have become intertwined, each strange encounter a reminder that some horrors never fade. They merely change shape, lingering at the edges of our reality, waiting for the moment when we dare to look up. Hey everyone, if you found this channel gripping and want more jaw-dropping tales, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop. Redditor 2, September 7, 2015, Labor Day. A date that should have been ordinary, marked only by the hum of the city and the predictable chaos of inner-city life in Los Angeles. I was alone in my small apartment that night, the kind of solitude that makes the dark hours stretch out interminably. I hate going to sleep on an empty stomach, so I decided to grab a bite from the corner diner before the city swallowed me whole. The walk to my car, parked in a cramped, gated lot I rented from a landlord whose rules were as strict as his rent was high, always felt like a mini battle against the night. I left my building just as the city was beginning to settle into its nocturnal rhythm. In Los Angeles County, anyone who lives in the inner city knows how brutal parking can be. and that gated lot was my only reprieve from the usual madness. The route from my house to my car took me through a sketchy alley, a narrow passage where the flicker of broken streetlights and the hum of distant traffic created a soundtrack of unease. I always walked fast, eyes darting to every shadow, half expecting to spot a drug dealer, a gangbanger, or someone else with ill intent. That night, however, something entirely unexpected stopped me in my tracks. As I moved through the alley, a rare moment of distraction pulled my gaze upward. Normally, the light pollution here leaves little of the night sky visible, but tonight one star shone with a brilliance that defied the urban glow. There was no physical urge, no instinctive need to admire it. It simply commanded my attention as if it were alive, aware, watching. It wasn't just another pinprick of light. It was a blazing beacon, so vivid and consuming that I couldn't tear my eyes away. I paused mid-step, heart hammering as I tried to understand what I was witnessing. Around me, the usual clutter of the night, the scattered refuse, the distant sound of sirens, the occasional rustle of a stray animal, faded into insignificance. The star hovered there, impossibly large in my peripheral vision, radiating an energy that felt almost palpable. It was as if the cosmos had taken a personal interest in me, shining in a way that no other celestial body had ever dared. For a few agonizing moments, I forgot about the dangers that lurked in every dark corner of the alley. I was mesmerized, fixated on that solitary, unnaturally bright star. The flickering lights of passing airplanes and the muted twinkle of other stars around it blurred into an indifferent backdrop. This one star, though, was different. It pulsed with an almost conscious intensity, as if it knew I was there, as if it was aware that I was watching. I shook my head, trying to clear the strange sense of familiarity that had overtaken me. It was absurd to be captivated by a star in a place like this, but I couldn't look away. The moment stretched on until I reluctantly tore my eyes away to focus on the task at hand, reaching the electronic gate that separated me from the relative safety of my car. I fumbled for my remote in my pocket, my fingers trembling slightly from the rush of inexplicable fear mixed with awe. The gate's mechanical hum broke the silence as it slid open, yet my eyes remained locked on the sky. And then, in an instant that defied logic, the star jolted. One moment it was fixed and almost sentient in its stillness. The next, it blazed off across the heavens with a speed that made my blood run cold. It shot away like a missile, leaving behind a trail of light that faded into the darkness faster than any airliner I'd ever seen. I stood frozen for a split second, the remote still clutched in my hand, as the impossible spectacle unfolded above me. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. What had I just seen? Was it some kind of astronomical anomaly or something far more sinister? The brilliant streak across the sky left a void where that mesmerizing presence had been, and for a long moment, I couldn't move, paralyzed by a mixture of awe and terror. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, to find shelter, yet my feet were rooted to the cold, cracked pavement. I stepped into the gated lot and hurried toward my car, each footstep echoing in the oppressive silence that now felt like it was closing in on me. The electronic gate slid shut behind me with a final, unyielding clank, sealing me into a space that suddenly felt claustrophobic and foreboding. Inside the car, I fumbled to start the engine, my hands slick with sweat and my heart thundering in my ears. As I drove away, the image of that star, alive, vibrant, and impossibly fast, burned itself into my memory like a scar. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxious thoughts and hyper-alert senses. I found myself glancing repeatedly at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that brilliant orb chasing me, its glow piercing the darkness behind me. Every so often, the familiar urban landscape of Los Angeles would morph into something else, a distorted, surreal version of itself where shadows stretched too long and every distant sound hinted at unseen movement. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the fabric of my reality. The mundane details of life, the hum of traffic, the distant murmur of voices, even the flickering neon signs had taken on a sinister undertone. I started noticing oddities, a glint in the corner of my eye that wasn't there before, whispers of movement in the dead of night, and that unsettling sensation of being constantly observed. At times, I would catch myself staring into the darkness, half hoping that the star might reappear, offering some explanation for its brief but profound intrusion into my life. Late one night, as I walked the same alley that had borne witness to my inexplicable encounter, I felt an overwhelming urge to look up again. The alley was as deserted as ever, its cracked pavement and graffiti-stained walls a testament to the decay of urban neglect. Yet, above the usual smog and neon haze, the sky was eerily clear. I lifted my eyes slowly, my breath catching in my throat, and searched for that singular, mesmerizing light. For a moment nothing happened, only the endless scatter of distant stars in a sea of urban glow. But then, far off in the northwest, I saw it again. That one star, more vivid than all the others combined, as if it had borrowed the brilliance of the entire cosmos just for that one instant. This time, however, the star did not remain still. It shimmered, almost imperceptibly at first, before beginning a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to defy the laws of nature. I stood rooted to the spot, my mind unable to decide whether I was witnessing a miracle or a harbinger of something far more disturbing. The familiar terror returned, its grip tightening around my throat as I slowly backed away from the alley. The sensation was unmistakable, an unseen presence, as if the star had marked me in some inexplicable way, and now I was being watched by something that existed beyond the realm of normal understanding. In the following weeks, sleep became a battleground. Nights were restless, haunted by dreams of brilliant lights and shadowy figures, of endless skies and the sensation of being pursued by an entity too vast and inscrutable to comprehend. I began to question my own sanity, wondering if my mind was conjuring these horrors in response to the relentless isolation of urban life. But deep down, I knew that what I had seen was real. The star, with its impossible speed and unnerving presence, was not a trick of the light. It was a phenomenon that had shattered my perception of normalcy. I started avoiding that particular alley, choosing longer routes to my car, but the memory of that night clung to me like a dark secret. Even in the bright glare of daytime, I could feel the residual chill of that encounter, a silent reminder that the universe had once reached down into my life and stirred something primal and uncontrollable. Every night, as I locked my car and headed home, I couldn't help but glance upward, half expecting to catch another glimpse of that otherworldly glow, a beacon of mystery in a city that had suddenly become far less familiar. Now, whenever I pass through that gated lot or walk that same dark alley, I'm haunted by the possibility that the star might return to reclaim its silent vigil over me. The ordinary has been forever tainted by that singular, impossible moment, a reminder that even in a city as gritty and predictable as Los Angeles, the cosmos can still unleash wonders and terrors beyond our wildest imagining. And until the day I can explain or forget that brilliant, moving star, I will forever be marked by its unsettling glow, a silent witness to a night when the boundaries of our world were irrevocably blurred. Redditor 3. I still remember that summer evening in Portland like a half-remembered dream, a moment suspended between reality and something far more inexplicable. We were a running group, a tight-knit band of early risers and night owls, meeting at our usual park for one of our routine workouts. That day, however, fate had other plans. We had chosen a sloping field in the vast park for our break, a quiet spot away from the well-trodden paths where the city's din softened into a gentle murmur. It was dusk, and the sky was an endless expanse of beautiful, deep azure. Not a single star graced that clear evening, which made the later events all the more surreal. As we slowed our pace and gathered on the grass, our laughter and easy conversation mingled with the cool, settling air. I remember stretching my legs, feeling the gentle burn of exercise and the faint scent of pine mixed with the city's distant hum. We joked about mundane things, sore muscles, the absurdity of urban running, but a strange silence suddenly fell over us. My eyes, unbidden, drifted upward. There, against the rich indigo backdrop, 2 points of light had ignited in the sky. At first glance, they resembled distant airplanes, though they twinkled in a manner no conventional aircraft ever could. They weren't moving, suspended like jewels against the fabric of the evening. A murmur ran through the group as we exchanged puzzled glances. Must be planes coming in, one of my friends speculated, trying to rationalize the impossible. But as I watched, a third light flickered into existence beside the first two, then a fourth, and soon there were 6 or 7 glimmering orbs aligned in a neat, almost deliberate row. Their placement was too precise, too orderly to be a mere quirk of nature or a random play of light. We stood there, our breaths collectively held, as our casual conversation dissolved into awed silence. The lights were unlike anything I had ever seen. They sparkled with a delicate intensity, far removed from the typical steady beam of a plane's landing lights. The way they glowed, almost as if they were pulsing, filled the sky with an otherworldly rhythm. I found myself wondering if they were simply a trick of the cooling evening air, a mirage conjured by the drop in temperature. Yet every instinct told me that these were not ordinary stars, not even distant airplanes. They held a subtle vibrancy, as if each one was alive in its own right. Our discussion turned into a hushed debate. Some of us leaned closer, squinting to discern any sign of movement. That's when the unthinkable happened. One of the lights, quicker than any aircraft I had ever witnessed, abruptly darted to the left and then halted mid-air. A collective gasp escaped from our group. In that instant, one of the other lights mirrored the movement, shuffling in precise succession. It was as if a silent command had been issued, and the lights were obeying in an orchestrated dance. The initial orderly display dissolved into chaos. The lights began to shift positions rapidly, darting across the sky in a frenetic, almost playful frolic. At first, their motion reminded me of a swarm of gnats, circling in erratic patterns. But as I watched more closely, I realized these were not mere insects. It was something far more deliberate and disturbing. They twirled and circled each other with an intensity that defied any logic I knew. Their movements were too calculated, too synchronized to be random. They were engaged in a macabre ballet that felt both mesmerizing and menacing. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing the rapid shifts overhead. The sky, which had been a serene canvas of azure moments before, now pulsed with a frenetic energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and dread as I tried to rationalize the spectacle. I glanced around at my fellow runners. There was a shared, unspoken agreement among us that what we were witnessing was beyond the realm of normal explanation. It was as if we had all been pulled into a secret, that the universe itself was whispering. Then, as abruptly as the chaotic dance had begun, 3 of the lights blinked out, one after the other, leaving us with a dwindling number of glowing orbs. The remaining lights, now fewer in number, began to drift away slowly. Their movement was measured, almost as if they were bidding farewell. They glided across the sky in a straight, unhurried path, reminiscent of a lone helicopter departing in the dead of night. Every detail of that final moment was seared into my memory. The precision of their departure, the eerie calm that followed, and the haunting emptiness they left behind. I'm not sure what to make of it all now. In the aftermath of that evening, my mind churned with questions that still have no answers. Had we witnessed some bizarre atmospheric phenomenon? Or was it something entirely otherworldly, a glimpse into a realm of existence that defies our understanding of physics and nature? The rational part of my brain wanted to dismiss it as an optical illusion, perhaps a trick of light and shadow combined with the tiredness of a long day. But the visceral terror I felt, the inexplicable chill that swept over me as the lights danced in that surreal performance, told a different story. I am profoundly grateful for the presence of my running group that night. Had I been alone, I might have dismissed the experience as a hallucination, a fleeting anomaly born from exhaustion and isolation. But the collective witnessing, the shared wonder and fear among us, anchored the memory in a way that no solitary experience ever could. We talked about it in hushed tones in the days that followed, each of us piecing together our own fragment of that inexplicable event. And yet, no matter how much we tried to rationalize it, the event defied explanation. There was an unsettling consensus among us. Nothing we had ever seen could behave like those lights. Since that night, every time I find myself outdoors at dusk, my eyes instinctively drift upward. I wonder if, hidden somewhere beyond the veneer of a mundane sky, those brilliant dancing lights might reappear, if only for a moment, to remind me of the night when the ordinary world gave way to something terrifyingly extraordinary. The memory of that chaotic dance, the abrupt disappearance of some lights and the graceful departure of the others, lingers like a ghost at the edges of my consciousness. In the quiet moments before sleep, I sometimes replay the scene in my mind. The deep blue of the sky, the crisp air of Portland's summer, and the surreal brilliance of those unearthly stars. I wonder if there is a message in their erratic performance, a secret that the cosmos was trying to impart. Or perhaps it was simply an anomaly, a rare convergence of conditions that produced a spectacle so strange and beautiful that it defied explanation. Whatever the truth, I know that it changed me. I no longer look at the sky with the same innocent wonder I once did. Now, every glimmer of light, every unexpected movement in the night serves as a reminder that the universe is vast and mysterious, filled with phenomena that can inspire both awe and a profound, unshakable dread. I continue to run, to meet my group in that familiar park. Yet the experience has left an indelible mark on my soul. Each stride I take on those early summer evenings is accompanied by a silent question: what other secrets does the night hold? And as I pace along the familiar trails, I find myself searching the twilight for that unmistakable brilliance, a celestial performance that once transformed a routine break into an encounter with the inexplicable. I remain haunted by the thought that somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the universe, the lights might return, beckoning me once again to witness their eerie dance. Redditor 4. I never believed in UFOs, not until that night shattered every notion I had held about the ordinary world. It was a cool, clear evening, the kind where the fading light paints long, distorted shadows over suburban streets. I was driving home after a long day at work, a routine trip along familiar roads near Edwards Air Force Base. The area, a curious mix of military presence and civilian housing, always held an undercurrent of tension for me. I'd heard whispers about secret tests and experimental technology, but I dismissed them as conspiracy fodder. Until that night. I had just turned onto a quiet street lined with modest homes and well-manicured lawns. The sky above was a deep, endless navy, and the stars, usually muted by the glow of city lights, were barely visible. My mind was on autopilot as I merged onto the road, the hum of the engine a constant companion. I was a skeptic, a man of reason who believed in logic above all else. Yet, as I drove past a cluster of parked cars by the roadside, something in the air prickled at the back of my neck. The road suddenly seemed to pause, and I noticed that several vehicles had pulled over, their drivers craning their necks upward. I eased my car to a stop at a red light, my curiosity piqued despite the rational part of my brain insisting it was just a momentary distraction. I glanced in my rearview mirror and then up at the sky. There, floating unnervingly close, no more than 20 feet above the asphalt, was a strange, metallic craft. It was the size of a typical sedan, but it defied all expectations of what any known aircraft should look like. At first, the object moved slowly, almost languidly, as if it were testing the boundaries of gravity. The surface of the craft gleamed in the dim light, reflecting the scattered neon of nearby street lamps. I remember feeling a chill that wasn't entirely due to the cool night air. Every instinct in me screamed that this was something unnatural. My hand instinctively tightened on the steering wheel, and for a long moment, I couldn't decide whether to continue driving or to simply sit there, frozen in place. Then, as if the laws of physics had suddenly been rewritten, the craft jerked into motion. It accelerated with an alarming burst of speed that made my heart skip a beat. In a single, fluid motion, it shot forward as if propelled by some unseen force. I could barely process what I was seeing when the object executed a perfect 90-degree turn on a dime. It was as if it had a mind of its own, defying every known aerodynamic principle. My skepticism battled with a rising, primal fear. I had to know if what I was witnessing was real. For a few agonizing seconds, everything around me seemed to fall away. The red light eventually cycled to green, but I found myself too entranced to move. I watched, breath caught in my throat, as the craft, without a hint of hesitation, veered upward. It climbed steadily, moving directly toward a distant mountain that loomed on the horizon, its silhouette stark against the night sky. I remember the moment vividly, the way it ascended so seamlessly as if it were gliding along an invisible ramp built into the very fabric of the air. People began to emerge from their cars, their faces illuminated by a mix of streetlights and the eerie glow emanating from the object. Their expressions were a mix of wonder, fear, and disbelief. I could see the questions in their eyes as they gawked upward, searching for answers in the silent night. I felt a strange camaraderie with these strangers, bound together by a shared experience that defied explanation. As the craft disappeared over the mountain, a heavy silence fell over the gathered crowd. The murmurs of disbelief and tentative theories filled the space between us. Some speculated about experimental military drones. After all, testing at Edwards was no secret. But I knew better. I had followed the news for years, and I was well aware that the Air Force's drones were highly classified, rarely, if ever, seen so low over civilian areas. The official narrative didn't add up. It was too blatant, too defiant of conventional technology. I was a skeptic, yes, but I was also a man who trusted what his eyes had witnessed. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the engine of my car idling softly as I tried to process the encounter. The rational part of me began constructing possible explanations: a malfunctioning weather balloon, a covert military experiment, even a trick of the light caused by atmospheric conditions. But none of those theories felt satisfying, and deep down I knew that what I had seen was not of this world. It wasn't the erratic movement of a drone, nor was it the erratic drift of an experimental aircraft. It was something altogether different. Even now, weeks later, that night lingers in my mind like a half-remembered dream. Every time I drive near Edwards or pass through that section of civilian housing, I find myself glancing upward, half expecting to see that bizarre metallic glimmer once again. I often recall the moment, the object's slow, deliberate motion, the instantaneous burst of speed, and its almost casual defiance of gravity as it soared upward. It was as if the craft was acknowledging us, as if it were leaving behind a subtle message. There are forces at work that we can neither fully understand nor control. Since that evening, I've searched for answers. I've scoured articles, delved into forums, and even questioned a few acquaintances in the military, hoping that someone might shed light on the mystery. But every inquiry only deepened the enigma. The official reports are scant and shrouded in secrecy, and every explanation seems to be more of a diversion than a truth. The incident has become a permanent fixture in my mind, a reminder that our understanding of the world is far from complete. Sometimes I wonder if that night was a one-off occurrence or if it was just the tip of an iceberg that stretches far beyond our limited perception. I've tried to convince myself that it was merely a trick of the light, a misinterpretation of an ordinary event, but the details are etched into my memory with a clarity that leaves little room for doubt. The precise, almost mechanical turn, the unprecedented speed, and the trajectory that carried the craft over the mountain as if it were following an unspoken command. I remember the exact feeling of that moment, the mix of terror and wonder that clutched at my heart as I realized I was witnessing something extraordinary. My pulse raced, my hands trembled, and for a brief, suspended moment, I forgot what it meant to be rational. In that split second, the universe had unveiled a secret that I wasn't meant to know, and I was left questioning everything I thought I understood about reality. I'm still a skeptic at heart, but that night changed me. I no longer dismiss the inexplicable as mere fantasy. Instead, I embrace the possibility that there is more to our world than meets the eye, that the night sky holds secrets that defy our conventional wisdom. And though I still search for logical explanations, the memory of that metallic object, a silent, awe-inspiring witness to a moment of cosmic defiance, remains a constant reminder that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Every so often, when the night is particularly clear and the air carries a hint of mystery, I find myself gazing upward, hoping for a glimpse of that impossible craft. And each time, a part of me wonders if the universe will offer up its secrets again, even if only for a fleeting moment. Retort 5. I still remember that night in my first semester of college. The kind of evening that starts with promise and ends with questions that haunt you for years. My friends and I had decided to go stargazing, seeking a moment of clarity amidst the stress of new beginnings. Our school sat high in the mountains, where the sky stretched overhead like a vast dome, a celestial ceiling so close and detailed it made every star seem like an intimate secret. We set out with nothing more than a couple of blankets, a shared joint, and a burning curiosity to see what the universe might reveal. As we settled on a grassy patch, the cool mountain air mingled with the subtle scents of pine and earth. My friends passed around the joint, their laughter and light-hearted banter blending with the rustle of the wind. I sat there quietly, eyes fixed upward, absorbing the breathtaking expanse above us. The sky was clear and infinite, the familiar constellations mingling with the soft glow of twilight, and then, out of nowhere, something shifted. A fleeting flash that made my heart skip a beat. I was staring up at the dome of stars when suddenly a saucer-like object streaked across the sky. For a moment I pointed at it, my voice barely a whisper, asking, "Do you guys see that?" But my words were swallowed by the murmur of distracted conversation and the haze of smoke. My friends seemed preoccupied, their eyes caught in the swirl of their own altered perceptions. I dismissed it, thinking perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me. An optical illusion born from the mix of cannabis and wonder. Yet, no sooner had I let the image fade than it returned. This time it came back flying incredibly low, much lower than any aircraft I had ever seen. The object was unnervingly silent as it hovered, its underside illuminated by green and red lights that glowed steadily, not flashing in the manner of regulated air traffic. Those colors were odd, yet mesmerizing, casting eerie reflections on the clouds above. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched, unable to tear my eyes away from the surreal spectacle unfolding above us. A murmur of shock rippled through the group when a few of my friends finally acknowledged the anomaly. Their skeptical glances shifted toward me as I tried to articulate what I was seeing. "It wasn't just a plane," I insisted, my voice trembling with both fear and exhilaration. "It was something else, something real." Despite their doubts, deep down I knew what I had witnessed. I had always secretly hoped to see a UFO, and there, in that moment, my wish seemed to have been granted by a capricious universe. The object hovered for what felt like an eternity, suspended in that moment between ordinary reality and the extraordinary unknown. The sky, usually a backdrop of comforting familiarity, had transformed into a stage for a spectacle that defied explanation. I felt a chill that wasn't entirely due to the mountain night. It was a chill that seeped into my bones, a silent warning that the world was not as it seemed. That encounter was only the beginning of a series of bizarre events that would forever alter my perception of reality. In the days following that stargazing night, I began having dreams that blurred the lines between sleep and waking life. One dream, in particular, seared itself into my memory with a vividness that made it impossible to dismiss as mere fantasy. It began in the familiar comfort of my own room, a setting so exact that every detail of my house was replicated in uncanny precision. I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly ahead, lost in thought, when the dream shifted. I felt as though I were watching myself from a distance, an observer of my own uneventful life. But then the atmosphere changed. The room grew dim, shadows lengthened, and an oppressive feeling of dread settled over everything. Without warning, the back door creaked open. I turned to see figures entering. Aliens, their skin a dull grayish-brown that seemed to absorb the little light there was. Their eyes held an inscrutable calm, and their movements were deliberate, as if every step had been rehearsed. They didn't speak at first, their silence more unnerving than any words could be. I tried to rise, to run, but found myself frozen in place, compelled to watch as they approached me. One of them reached out, its hand cold and unyielding, and grabbed my arm. I stammered, where are we going?" But the reply came not through sound, but through a force that filled my mind, a telepathic message that resonated with an eerie finality. "You have a disease. We can cure it, but we are going to use you to cure our species." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I wasn't sure if it was a threat or a promise, but the implication was chilling. My mind raced with questions. What disease could I possibly have? What did they mean by cure our species? The aliens' faces remained impassive, their eyes devoid of emotion as they conveyed their cryptic message. In the next moment, the scene shifted again. I found myself outside, clutching my phone with a desperate urgency. I tried to check the time, to confirm whether I was trapped in a temporal anomaly or if I was losing precious minutes of sleep. But the screen remained stubbornly unresponsive, my Samsung's display frozen in a static glow that offered no answers. Panic set in as I felt the grip of inexplicable dread tightening around me. The air was thick with the scent of impending change, and every second stretched out into an eternity of uncertainty. Then, as if guided by some unseen hand, I looked up. I was standing in my backyard, the familiar contours of my home bathed in the gentle light of dawn. The rising sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the dark, oppressive night of my dream. And there, in that surreal moment between sleep and wakefulness, I saw it again. The saucer, gliding silently above, its trajectory as deliberate as it was mesmerizing. The craft, the same object I had witnessed while stargazing with my friends, was now receding into the horizon. Its departure was graceful, almost as if it were saying goodbye to a world it could never fully understand. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the remnants of my dream mingling with the morning light. The surreal overlap of my waking reality and the vivid tapestry of my nightmare left me questioning everything I thought I knew. For days after that morning, I struggled to reconcile the two experiences. Was the UFO I saw while stargazing connected to the bizarre dream of abduction? Was it possible that the universe was trying to tell me something, using both the clarity of a shared moment with friends and the unsettling whispers of my subconscious? I found myself haunted by the images, the steady glow of green and red lights in the night sky, the cold, unyielding touch of alien hands, and the cryptic message delivered without a sound. It was as if two parallel worlds had collided within me, each reinforcing the other in a way that left no room for doubt. I began to research, scouring forums and obscure articles, desperate for any explanation that could piece together the fragments of my experiences. Every rational theory fell short. Military drones, atmospheric anomalies, even hallucinations induced by our stargazing session, all seemed inadequate to capture the depth of what I had witnessed. The more I looked, the more I realized that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, lurking in the shadowy peripheries of our understanding. Now, whenever I find myself under a clear sky, whether on a solitary night drive or during a quiet moment on a rooftop, I still look upward. There's an unspoken promise in the darkness, a possibility that the extraordinary might reappear at any moment. I remember that first night in the mountains, the way the dome of the sky seemed to bend around us, holding secrets too vast to fathom. And I remember the dream, the haunting encounter that left me questioning the nature of reality itself. In the end, I'm left with more questions than answers. But perhaps that is the true nature of our existence, a constant interplay between the known and the unknown, the mundane and the miraculous. And even though my friends might dismiss my memories as vivid hallucinations or overactive imagination, I know what I saw. I know the chill of the mountain night, the piercing glow of an unearthly craft, and the inexplicable terror of an alien abduction that felt as real as the rising sun. So, I continue to watch the skies, ever hopeful and forever wary, waiting for another glimpse of that impossible light. And in the quiet moments before sleep, I still hear the silent echo of those telepathic words. A reminder that in this vast, mysterious universe, the line between dreams and reality is frighteningly thin. Redditor 6. I was driving on the highway that cold November night, November 21st, 2015 to be exact, in Ottawa, Ontario. The road was slick from an earlier drizzle, and the biting wind whipped past my car as I merged onto the deserted stretch of asphalt. I had been alone for hours, the hum of the engine and the soft thrum of the tires on wet pavement my only companions. The dashboard lights cast eerie shadows across the interior, and the darkness outside seemed to stretch into an endless void, broken only by the occasional gleam of a distant headlight. As I navigated the curves of the highway, my mind wandered to the mundane worries of everyday life. But then, without warning, something caught my eye, a tiny, flickering light in the distance. At first, I dismissed it as a shooting star. I had seen many shooting stars over the years, their transient trails etching brief, luminous paths across the night sky. However, this little blue light was different. It was a piercing shade of blue that cut through the darkness, and unlike any shooting star I'd ever witnessed, it left no trail behind. I slowed my car, my foot easing off the accelerator as I squinted through the windshield. The light wasn't moving like a meteor streaking across the sky. It was gliding with an eerie steadiness that defied logic. There was no parabolic arc or fading brilliance, only a small, solid point of blue moving with a precision that made my heart pound in my chest. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I tried to process what I was seeing. The light moved with a speed that was impossible, a flash of brilliance that darted ahead of me 3 times faster than any natural phenomenon, defying gravity and physics with every calculated turn. The highway, usually a symbol of freedom and routine, had transformed into a stage for something inexplicable. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the light reflected in the polished metal of my car, but there was nothing there. I looked back at the road, and the little blue beacon was still there, now shifting its course with a fluid, almost deliberate motion. It was as if it were aware of my gaze, changing direction in a manner that defied any known logic. One moment, it skittered along the horizon, and the next, it veered sharply, an impossible maneuver that sent shivers racing down my spine. My mind raced as I tried to rationalize the experience. Could it be a misidentified aircraft, or perhaps an experimental military drone? I had heard rumors about secret tests and classified technology, but nothing I'd read or heard ever mentioned a craft behaving with such an otherworldly fluidity. The speed at which it moved was disconcerting, faster than anything I had ever seen, and without the trailing luminescence that usually marked a shooting star. This wasn't a fragment of space debris, it was something far more deliberate. As the minutes passed, I found myself caught in a state of suspended disbelief. Every instinct in my body urged me to keep driving, to put distance between myself and the inexplicable sight. Yet a deeper, inexplicable compulsion kept me rooted to my seat. My heart thudded against my ribs with such intensity that I could almost hear it, each beat echoing like a drum in the silent night. The blue light continued its erratic dance, shifting course and accelerating in bursts that made it appear to vanish momentarily, only to reappear in a different part of the sky. I remember thinking, this can't be real, as my mind fought to reconcile the familiar with the unknown. The light's movement was too controlled, too intentional. It wasn't the chaotic flare of a natural meteor. It was as if it were piloted by an intelligence beyond human comprehension. I watched, transfixed and terrified, as it executed a series of maneuvers that were both graceful and unsettling. It moved in straight lines and then suddenly darted off at an angle, as if testing the boundaries of the atmosphere or simply mocking the laws of physics. The vast silence of the night enveloped me, punctuated only by the soft purr of the engine and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. I could feel the weight of solitude pressing in on me, a reminder that, out here on the open highway, I was utterly alone with this enigma. The blue light seemed to be playing a game, a silent challenge to my understanding of the world. Each time it shifted direction, my pulse quickened and a cold sweat broke out along my forehead. I couldn't tear my eyes away from its mesmerizing glow, even as every rational thought screamed for me to speed away and forget what I'd seen. At one point, the light darted across my field of vision so rapidly that I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, it was momentarily gone. I pressed harder on the accelerator, trying to catch up, and for a few seconds, there was nothing but the dark expanse of the night and the rhythmic patter of raindrops on the windshield. Then, as if emerging from a hidden alcove in the sky, the blue light reappeared. It now hovered just above the edge of the highway, its presence undeniable and chilling. I could almost feel its gaze, as though it were watching me, evaluating my every move. A mix of terror and awe overwhelmed me. My mind, usually so anchored in the concrete certainties of daily life, was now adrift in a sea of cosmic possibilities. I tried to tell myself that there must be a logical explanation, a trick of the light, a rare atmospheric phenomenon, but deep down, I knew that nothing about this made sense. The way it moved, the speed at which it accelerated, the absence of any natural trail, it all pointed to something beyond the mundane. For what felt like an eternity, I remained fixated on that little blue light, each second stretching out into an agonizing blend of fear and fascination. The highway seemed to narrow around me, the roadside trees and distant structures blurring into insignificance as my focus remained solely on the spectral visitor in the sky. My mind conjured up images of alien technology, of silent, advanced beings traversing the cosmos with an ease that dwarfed our understanding of physics. Every instinct screamed that I was witnessing something extraordinary, something that defied every explanation I'd ever known. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the blue light began to fade. It slowed, its erratic movement softening until it resembled a slowly dimming ember against the backdrop of the endless night. I felt a profound sense of loss, as if the universe had pulled a secret from right before my eyes. I continued driving, my mind racing with unanswered questions. The image of that unearthly glow seared into my memory. The rest of the journey passed in a surreal haze. Every familiar landmark seemed tinged with the possibility of the extraordinary, every darkened sky holding the potential for another inexplicable encounter. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for several minutes, unwilling to break the spell of that night. The cold, quiet suburban street offered no explanation, no reassurance that the world was as it should be. I stepped out of the car slowly, each movement deliberate as I tried to ground myself back in the reality I once knew. Yet, even as I walked up to my front door, I couldn't shake the overwhelming sensation that I had glimpsed a truth far greater and more mysterious than anything I had ever dared to imagine. In the days that followed, the memory of that little blue light haunted me relentlessly. I replayed the moment over and over in my mind, dissecting every detail, every nuance of its impossible flight. I found myself driving the same highway at different times, half expecting to see that spectral visitor reappear. Every time I glanced upward, my eyes searched the dark expanse for that unmistakable glow, a silent promise that the universe held secrets far beyond our comprehension. I tried to rationalize it away with science, with statistics and probabilities, but the memory was too vivid, too charged with raw, unfiltered emotion. It wasn't just a fleeting anomaly in the night sky. It was a profound moment of intersection between the known and the unfathomable. My rational mind could offer no comfort against the certainty that something had shifted, that the world was infinitely more mysterious and dangerous than I had ever believed. Even now, years later, whenever I find myself driving on an empty highway or standing beneath a vast, starless sky, I remember that night in Ottawa. The little blue light, with its impossible speed and silent defiance of gravity, continues to echo in my mind, a chilling reminder that sometimes the universe reveals itself in ways that shatter our deepest assumptions. I know that I will never view the night the same way again, for it holds within it the memory of an encounter that defies explanation, a moment when the familiar world gave way to the extraordinary, and for a brief, terrifying instant, I touched the edge of something otherworldly. Redditor 7. I was sitting in the living room with my family on what I expected to be an ordinary late afternoon. The clock on the wall had just struck 5 p.m., and the fading sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long, warm shadows across the room. We were all gathered around the television, absorbed in the latest sitcom rerun, when something caught my eye. At first, I thought it might be a trick of the light, a mere reflection from a passing cloud. But as I strained to see, I realized that what I was witnessing was anything but ordinary. I casually rose from my seat, my gaze drifting toward the window as if pulled by an unseen force. Outside, not more than a half-mile away from where I sat, a gleaming object hovered in the sky. It was the most cliché UFO imaginable, something that seemed ripped straight from one of those 1950s Martian invasion films. The craft was a perfect, circular disc with a beautiful gleaming gold exterior that caught the dying light of the afternoon sun. Its surface was smooth and unblemished, almost too pristine to be real. Along its rim, I could discern what looked like rows of windows, each one dark, like tiny, empty portals leading to a realm unknown. I stood there, heart pounding so audibly I was sure my family could hear it, as I watched the object move. It glided through the air like a helicopter, but its motion was languid, almost graceful, a slow, deliberate drift that defied the hurried pace of the world around me. There was an eerie serenity to its movement, as if the craft had no urgency, no destination, merely a desire to exist in that suspended moment of golden light and descending dusk. In that instant, the living room around me faded into a blur. The laughter of my siblings, the casual conversation of my parents, all of it seemed to vanish, replaced by an overwhelming sense of isolation. I was alone with this impossible vision. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. I'd always prided myself on my rationality, my ability to dismiss fanciful notions and stick to what was real. But as I stared out the window, every logical explanation evaporated. This was no reflection, no mere atmospheric oddity. It was something deliberate, something unmistakably alien. I felt a chill run down my spine. a primal warning that echoed in the depths of my memory. I wanted to speak, to call out to my family, but the shock rendered me mute. I sat there, frozen, my eyes locked on the brilliant, otherworldly orb drifting slowly against the backdrop of the slowly darkening sky. I could almost feel its presence, as if the craft were studying me just as intently as I was studying it. Then, as if on cue, the UFO began to alter its path. With a smooth, almost theatrical motion, it drifted toward a solitary tree that stood in a small clearing near our home. I watched, transfixed, as it moved directly behind the tree. In that fleeting moment, I caught one last glimpse of its gleaming gold surface and the stark black windows that made it all the more reminiscent of a retro science fiction prop, and then it was gone, completely swallowed by the tree's broad, shadowy canopy, vanishing from sight as though it had never been there at all. I remained at the window for what felt like an eternity, my eyes desperately searching the spot where it had disappeared. The room was silent, the usual background hum of the television reduced to a distant murmur, as if the entire universe had paused to acknowledge the impossibility of what I had just witnessed. My heart continued to beat wildly, a constant reminder that I had experienced something that defied all understanding. When I finally turned back to the rest of my family, their faces were blurred in my mind. They were still laughing, still talking, completely unaware of the spectacle I had just seen. Later that evening, as twilight deepened into night, I tried to recount the experience. I explained it in halting, breathless sentences, detailing the golden disk, the dark windows, and the slow, deliberate movement that had so paralyzed me with awe and terror. But my words fell on deaf ears. My family exchanged skeptical glances, dismissing my account as a trick of the light, or perhaps a figment of an overactive imagination. They laughed it off, saying that I must have been dreaming or that the stress of the day had played tricks on me. Despite their reassurances, I knew in my bones what I had seen was real. Over the following days, the memory of that afternoon haunted me. I found myself continually glancing out the window during every idle moment, half expecting the golden disk to reappear. I scoured the internet for similar accounts, reading forum posts and articles that spoke of UFO sightings and alien visitations. Yet nothing could quite capture the visceral impact of my own experience, the vividness of that moment, the way the sunlight had danced off the metal surface of the craft, the quiet majesty of its slow movement, and the profound stillness that had filled the room remained etched in my mind. At night, I would lie awake, replaying the scene over and over in my head. The silence of the dark hours made the memory all the more potent, as if the UFO had left behind a residual energy that continued to permeate the air. Sometimes in the dead of night, I could almost swear I heard the faint hum of a craft passing overhead, a sound so soft and otherworldly that it defied explanation. I would lie there, wide-eyed and restless, until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains and chased away the remnants of my haunted vigil. In the weeks that followed, I attempted to return to normalcy. I went about my daily routine, yet everything felt subtly altered. The mundane tasks of life, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the hum of the car engine on the drive to work, took on a strange, surreal quality. I found myself questioning the boundaries of reality, wondering if the world was hiding secrets too profound for human comprehension. My once comforting window now seemed like a portal to an unknowable cosmos, one where mysteries lurked behind every branch and every flicker of light. I also noticed how, when I spoke of that day to acquaintances, my story was met with polite nods and forced smiles. Few wanted to entertain the possibility that something extraordinary had occurred right in our suburban neighborhood. The experience had left me isolated in a way that was deeply unsettling, a solitary witness to an event that no one else could confirm. The skepticism of others only deepened my own internal struggle as I grappled with the tension between what I knew I had seen and the persistent need for external validation. There were moments when I questioned my sanity. Had I really witnessed a UFO, or had my mind, under the strain of everyday life, conjured a fantastical illusion? The memory was too clear, too detailed for it to be mere fantasy. I still remember the gentle curve of the object's edge, the contrast of its radiant gold surface against the stark, inky darkness of the sky, and those unnerving, perfectly rectangular windows that hinted at a technology far beyond anything we have on Earth. I began keeping a journal, meticulously recording every fleeting thought and sensation related to that afternoon. The act of writing helped to anchor the memory in a tangible way, even as it only deepened the mystery. I scribbled down descriptions of the light, the soundless majesty of its movement, and the way it had seemed to command the very air around it. I wrote about the feeling of being simultaneously exposed and shielded by the window's glass, a fragile barrier between my familiar world and an unimaginable one. Yet no matter how carefully I documented the event, the words could never fully capture the profound impact it had on me. Even now, whenever the late afternoon sun bathes the world in its golden light, I can't help but glance out the window, hoping to see that impossible craft once more. I know that my family still dismisses my account as a bizarre anomaly, a trick of the mind, but I hold on to the truth of that moment. It remains a singular, haunting reminder that our universe is far more mysterious than we dare to imagine. And while I may never find a definitive explanation, the memory of that perfect golden UFO, so unmistakably real and yet so inexplicably transient, continues to whisper its enigmatic tale in the quiet corners of my mind. Redditor 8. I was on a routine night flight over a barren stretch of Afghan terrain, a desert of muted grays and dark silhouettes, when the unexplainable happened. I'd been deployed for nearly a year, and nights like these, flying the Raven UAV with its infrared camera, had become monotonously predictable. Our mission was simple: scan the roads for insurgents and IED placements, a task that, despite its life or meth stakes, often felt like endless hours of waiting in the dark. That night, the air was unusually still, the cold desert silence broken only by the low hum of the UAV's engines and the soft clicks of the operator's keyboard. I sat in the cramped makeshift cockpit of our mobile operations unit, eyes glued to the screen as we guided the drone over a network of dirt roads and scattered settlements. The image on the IR display was grainy yet detailed, a world stripped of color, where heat signatures told the true story of the night. I remember the moment vividly. In the lower corner of our camera's view, a small, circular hotspot suddenly materialized. At first, it looked like nothing more than another heat signature among the scattered glows of distant fires or engine burns. But as we flew on, its nature became impossible to ignore. It was perfectly circular, featureless, a stark, solid disk of the darkest black I'd ever seen on an infrared screen. There was no warmth to its glow, no flicker like a campfire or a vehicle's engine. It was cold, unnervingly so, as if it absorbed the very heat from around it. "Mike, you seeing this?" I asked softly into my headset, my voice barely a whisper against the steady backdrop of our routine chatter. The operator, a seasoned guy who had seen his share of inexplicable phenomena over these long nights, paused and leaned closer to his console. We both stared at the monitor, our eyes trying to decipher the anomaly against the familiar, chaotic backdrop of the desert. For a full 5 minutes, the object remained motionless, a dark, silent sphere hovering in the corner of our view, unmoving and utterly inscrutable. I could feel my pulse quicken, each beat a jarring reminder that something was off. The scene around it was normal enough: distant heat trails from the occasional vehicle, the low hum of other drones in the area. Yet here was this thing, a silent sentinel that defied every expectation of what should be there. I remember thinking, what in the world is that? The image was too perfect, too deliberate. It wasn't an insurgent's warm body or the transient glow of a campfire. It was something else entirely. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't a natural occurrence, that it wasn't simply another feature of the rugged terrain we'd grown so accustomed to. Then, without any warning or gradual transition, the sphere's behavior changed. In a fraction of a second, as if someone had flipped a switch, the dark orb jolted downward. It descended rapidly toward the ground, its motion so sudden and precise that it defied any semblance of natural physics. We were flying at about 1,600 feet above ground level when it dipped, almost brushing the surface of the arid landscape, and then, just as abruptly, it retracted. With a burst of speed that made the Raven's steady hum seem like a lullaby, the object shot back up into the sky, disappearing from our view as quickly as it had arrived. I fumbled for my headset, my heart hammering in my ears. "Talk, we've got something," I reported, voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and urgency. We immediately contacted the Tactical Operations Center, expecting that our command would have answers. Perhaps it was a malfunction, a sensor glitch, or even an experimental piece of equipment from one of the local contractors. But the response was dismissive, almost incredulous. "Must be a glitch," came the curt reply from the TOC, followed by a confirmation that satellite view had shown nothing unusual in that area. Their tone was cold, bureaucratic, a stark contrast to the chaos of our own rising panic. It was as if they were intent on erasing the anomaly from our memory to chalk it up to an error in the system. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen wasn't a mere technical hiccup. After the flight, back at our base, we downloaded the footage onto a specialized Toughbook laptop, a rugged machine built to withstand the harsh realities of combat zones. I sat in the dim light of the operations room, determined to review every second of that night's flight. My fingers trembled as I navigated through the video files, eager to find the 5 minutes during which the inexplicable black sphere had dominated our screen. And then I saw it. A void, a glaring absence where the UFO should have been. The footage was incomplete. Those 5 minutes had simply vanished, as if swallowed by a digital void. Every frame that should have captured the silent, hovering anomaly was missing. I replayed the sequence repeatedly, each time expecting a glimpse of that featureless cold disk. But there was nothing. It was as if the event had been scrubbed from our records, leaving behind nothing but the echo of our bewildered reactions. I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of the experience settling like a stone in my chest. Questions flooded my mind. Had it been real? What was the nature of that object? A drone of unknown origin? An experimental device? Or something not of this world at all? I had always prided myself on my rationality, on the certainty that every anomaly had a logical explanation. But that night, under the relentless, unforgiving Afghan sky, logic itself seemed to crumble. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the image of that dark, silent sphere from my mind. I tried discussing it with my comrades, the men and women who had flown countless hours over the hostile terrain, but their responses were mixed with a resigned skepticism. Some said it was a sensor malfunction. Others suggested it was nothing more than a mirage born of fatigue and stress. But I knew what I had seen, and every time I closed my eyes, the memory returned in stark detail. The cold, featureless disk that moved with impossible precision, the abrupt descent and subsequent vanish, and the maddening absence of any record on our equipment. Every night, as I lay in the barracks with the desert silence pressing in, I found myself haunted by the possibility that we had encountered something far beyond our understanding. The absence of the footage was more than a technical failure. It was a silent confirmation that some secrets were meant to remain hidden, locked away in the dark recesses of a reality that defied human comprehension. Even now, years later, I sometimes catch myself glancing at the night sky, wondering if that mysterious sphere might reappear in another form, if the universe might once again reveal a glimpse of its deeper, unsettling truths. The memory of that encounter has never faded. It lingers like a shadow at the edge of my consciousness, a constant reminder that in a world defined by routines and predictable dangers, there are moments when the extraordinary shatters the boundaries of our reality, leaving us to grapple with the unanswerable mysteries of the cosmos. I still remember the silent terror of that flight, the way time seemed to stretch and warp in the presence of the unknown. And though the footage is gone, erased as if by some deliberate, unfathomable force, the experience remains indelibly etched in my mind, a vivid, unyielding testament to the night when the laws of physics, and perhaps of nature itself, were suspended for just a few fleeting, terrifying minutes.